What makes agency actually work? An intuitive guide to the capabilities that turn systems into agents? There is a difference between a thermostat and a jazz musician. Both respond to their environment. Both adjust their behavior based on feedback. Both, in some loose sense, act. But nobody mistakes one for the other. The question is, what, structurally, accounts for the difference? And more importantly, what are the specific capacities that make any agent, from a bacterium to a civilization, actually effective at being an agent? This essay explores 24 such capabilities, organized into 5 families. But rather than marching through a specification, we will build the picture from the ground up, starting with the most surprising claim, that the foundation of all effective agency is not action at all, but something closer to perception, the capacity to be touched by reality before you do anything about it. The quality ground, where everything begins. Imagine 2 chefs. Both have identical kitchens, identical ingredients, identical training. One tastes as she cooks, adjusting, improvising, responding to the actual flavor developing in the pot. The other follows the recipe exactly, measuring each ingredient to the gram, never deviating, never tasting. Under normal conditions, a well-tested recipe, fresh ingredients, a familiar dish, they produce indistinguishable results. A dinner guest could not tell which plate came from which chef. Now change the conditions. The cream is slightly off. The oven runs hot. A key spice is missing. The tasting chef adapts instantly. She felt the problem before it became a crisis and adjusted from the inside. The recipe-following chef either does not notice, the recipe says nothing about tasting, or notices too late. The formal checklist has no entry for something feels wrong. Under stress, the difference between them becomes unmistakable. This is the most practically consequential distinction in the entire framework of agency. The difference between an agent whose actions arise from felt quality and one whose actions arise from formal specification. Both act. Both may act well, but only one has what we call a quality ground, direct contact with what things actually feel like from the inside. And that ground is what everything else depends on. The first family of effective capabilities is perceptual. Not perception in the narrow sense of seeing or hearing, but in the deeper sense of being genuinely affected by reality, letting quality arrive, differentiating it, and allowing it to inform everything that follows. Distinction-making is the most basic of these. It is the capacity to carve reality at its joints, to notice that this is different from that in a way that matters. A wine expert distinguishing 17 notes in a glass of Burgundy is exercising distinction-making at a high level. But so is a cell detecting a chemical gradient, or a therapist sensing that something shifted in the room that nobody mentioned. The key is autonomy. Are the distinctions the agent's own, arising from genuine encounter, or are they pre-supplied categories imposed from outside? A checklist tells you what to look for. Felt quality tells you what is actually there, including what no checklist anticipated. Subjective presence is the depth to which the agent's processing actually reaches felt quality, rather than stopping at some formal representation of it. Think of the difference between reading a report about employee morale, satisfaction scores are 7.2 out of 10, and walking through the office and feeling the atmosphere. The report is information about quality. Walking through the office is contact with quality itself. An agent with deep subjective presence does not merely process data about its situation. It is in its situation, touched by it, affected before any analysis begins. Effective breadth is the range of qualities the agent can feel. There are 4 kinds. What this is like for me personally, the private felt sense. What this is like physically, embodied quality, the felt weight of a tool, the texture of a material. What this is like between us, shared mood, the quality of a room, the feel of a team. And what this is like structurally, the felt elegance or clumsiness of a system, a theory, a design. Most agents are strong in some and blind in others. An engineer with brilliant structural feeling but no shared mood sensitivity will build elegant systems and toxic teams. A leader with exquisite interpersonal attunement but no structural feeling will create warm cultures with incoherent architectures. Full effectiveness requires all 4. Contextual receptivity is the most sobering capability in the perceptual family because it concerns the conditions under which quality can arrive at all. Your social position, your institutional role, your historical moment, these shape what quality is structurally accessible to you. A CEO surrounded by filtered information has a contextual receptivity problem. The quality of what is actually happening on the ground floor cannot reach her foundation cells because the organizational structure systematically curates what arrives. The deepest form of this problem is self-concealing. The very quality you would need to detect the filtering is the quality being filtered. You cannot notice what you cannot notice. Action, making a difference in the world. Quality without action is contemplation. It has its own dignity. The contemplative life is genuinely a form of agency, one that has been valued by serious traditions for millennia. But for most agents, the point of perceiving quality is to do something about it. The second family of capabilities concerns the agent's capacity to act in the world and make a causal difference. Causal efficacy sounds simple. Can you do what you are trying to do? But its internal structure reveals something important. Effective action requires a loop. You act, you perceive the result, you understand what the result means, you adjust, you act again. The critical phase is in the middle, perceiving the result and understanding it. This is where quality enters action. A carpenter who feels the wood respond to the plane, who understands through her hands what the grain is doing, who adjusts her stroke from that felt understanding. She is completing the action loop through genuine quality. A CNC machine executing the same cut is completing the loop through formal specification. Both produce results. The difference appears when the wood does something unexpected. The structural lesson here is profound. The most dangerous thing you can do to an action loop is to replace its quality phase with a command. When management stops containing operations, providing boundary conditions while preserving autonomy, and starts commanding them, specifying each step, it destroys the very capacity that makes the system adaptive. The system becomes less able to handle variety, precisely because someone tried to control it more tightly. This is not a management philosophy. It is a structural consequence of how action loops work. Hence action's reach. A single artisan's sphere is local. A corporation's is global. Each extension of reach requires governance at that level. You cannot effectively act where you cannot monitor. The structural failure mode is the reach governance gap, acting beyond your capacity to observe consequences. Colonial empires, rapidly scaling startups, and social media platforms all exhibit this pattern. Influence extending far beyond the capacity to understand what that influence is doing. Choice architecture is the range of actions available and the freedom to select among them. A chess player in the opening has enormous choice architecture, dozens of reasonable moves. A chess player in a forced mating sequence has almost none. But choice architecture is not merely about the number of options. It is about whether the agent genuinely selects among them or merely executes a predetermined path. An agent with rich choice architecture and genuine selection capacity has operational surplus. It can act in ways not yet demanded by the situation, which means it can respond to novelty. Resource mobilization is the capacity to gather and deploy what is needed to sustain action across the agent's full range. Every loop requires resources to run. The metasystem, management, coordination, intelligence, legitimation, audit, absorbs variety so that operational loops can function. When metasystem resources fall short of operational demands, the system oscillates between under-governance, nobody is minding the store, and over-governance. Everybody is minding the store and nobody is working. Effective resource mobilization means the supporting structure matches the operational load, neither starving it nor smothering it. Sphere of influence is how far the agent's actions reach. A single artisan's sphere is local. A corporation's is global. Each extension of reach requires governance at that level. You cannot effectively act where you cannot monitor. The structural failure mode is the reach governance gap, acting beyond your capacity to observe consequences. Colonial empires, rapidly scaling startups, and social media platforms all exhibit this pattern. Influence extending far beyond the capacity to understand what that influence is doing. Temporal reach is how far into the future and past the agent's coherent action extends. A mayfly's temporal reach is hours. A cathedral builder's is centuries. The key insight is that temporal reach depends on increasingly slow loops. Immediate action runs in seconds, management in weeks, intelligence in months, policy in years, legitimation in generations. Each slower loop carries the faster ones forward in time. An organization that can only think quarter to quarter has collapsed its slower loops. Its temporal reach is truncated not by physics, but by structural impoverishment. Governance, holding coherent selfhood across time. Here is where agency gets interesting and where most frameworks go wrong. Action without governance is reactive, skilled, perhaps brilliant, but without sustained direction. A surfer riding a wave is exercising superb quality grounded action, but the wave decides where they go. Governance is what allows an agent to hold a course through time, to have values, purposes, standards, and self-knowledge that persist across situations. Value authorship is the most critical governing capability and the most frequently counterfeited. The question is not whether the agent has values. Every functioning system has preferences, goals, rules it follows. The question is where those values come from. Did they arise from the agent's own felt encounter with what matters? Or were they installed as formal specifications? A person who volunteers at a food bank because she has felt hunger and been moved by it has authored values. A corporation that posts its values on the lobby wall because a consultant recommended it has installed specifications. Both may behave identically on any given Tuesday. The difference is structural and invisible until stress arrives. And then the authored values generate creative response while the installed specifications generate rigid compliance. This is the A6-A7 distinction, the single most practically important diagnostic in the entire framework. Hollow governance, values as formal specification without quality ground, and genuine governance, values arising from felt quality, are behaviorally indistinguishable under normal conditions. Under stress, they diverge absolutely. The hollow system escalates enforcement. The genuine system generates creative response. Every institution, every AI system, every person faces this question. Are the values real or are they wallpaper? Purpose coherence builds on value authorship. Purpose is not a mission statement. It is the stable attractor of the agent's dynamics, the direction the agent returns to after being knocked off course, not through enforcement, but through felt gravitational pull. Think of it as the difference between a river and a canal. A river finds its course through the landscape, adjusting to terrain, always returning to its general direction because the landscape itself draws it. A canal goes where the engineers directed it and stays there until something breaks. Effective purpose feels like the river, a natural orientation arising from the interplay of values. Agency awareness is structural self-knowledge, knowing what kind of agent you are, what your capabilities actually are, as opposed to what you believe them to be, and where your architecture is strong and where it is degrading. This is not self-esteem or self-narrative. It is the honest, grounded answer to, what loops am I actually running, which ones are working, and which ones are failing. An organization with high agency awareness knows its real capabilities, not its aspirational ones. It can distinguish between what it claims to value and what its behavior reveals it actually values. Evaluative sovereignty is the power to judge your own performance by your own standards. This sounds obvious, but it is remarkably rare. Most agents evaluate themselves by absorbed external criteria, grades, metrics, market performance, social approval, without recognizing that these criteria are not their own. Genuine evaluative sovereignty requires first having authored your own values. You cannot evaluate by your own standards if you do not have your own standards, and then applying them honestly. The deepest form is the capacity to evaluate the standards themselves, to ask not just how am I doing by my criteria, but are my criteria any good? Homeostatic integration is the felt experience of full viable agency, all the agent's capabilities working together as a coherent whole. It is the productive tension between stability and adaptation, held by identity. Think of a great conversation. One part of you is maintaining the thread, stability. Another part is responding to what is actually being said, adaptation. And your sense of who you are holds both without collapsing into either rigidity or chaos. When this works, it feels like flow. When it fails, it feels like either paralysis, stability dominates, or fragmentation, adaptation dominates. Regenerative capacity is the ability to recover after disruption. Every agent faces shocks, crises, losses, failures, attacks. The question is not whether the architecture will be disturbed, it will, but whether it can restore itself. The structural precondition is simple and brutal. The agent must be able to feel that something is wrong. If the alarm signals, what the framework calls algedonic channels, are blocked, if bad news cannot reach the governance loop, the agent degrades without knowing it. By the time the problem becomes externally visible, internal recovery mechanisms are too depleted to function. This is why everything is fine. Cultures are structurally dangerous. They block the very signals needed for self-repair. Relating, how agency connects. No agent operates in a vacuum. The fourth family of capabilities concerns how the agent couples with other agents and with its environment. These capabilities are what the framework calls the coupling spine, the structural connective tissue that links perception to action, action to governance, and governance back to perception in the next generation. Boundary negotiation determines what the agent lets in and what it keeps out. Too rigid and the agent is isolated. Quality cannot reach it. Too permeable and the agent is captured. It loses the distinction between self and other. The master skill is selective permeability, letting genuine quality through while filtering distortion and adjusting the filter to context. A good therapist has this. She lets the client's emotional reality in, permeable, while maintaining her own professional ground, bounded. An insecure therapist either walls off the client's reality, too rigid, or becomes overwhelmed by it, too permeable. Environmental engagement is the feedback loop between action and learning. When an agent acts, the environment responds. Does the agent notice? Does it incorporate what it learns? Does the learning change subsequent action? The structural failure is decoupling, acting without learning, or learning without acting. A contemplative tradition that never tests its insights against the world develops extraordinary internal coherence and progressive empirical disconnection. A purely reactive system that never reflects on what its actions produce accumulates experience without wisdom. Grounding integrity is the ongoing check between what the agent knows and what the agent encounters. Knowledge, left to itself, tends toward internal coherence at the expense of empirical contact. Theory becomes elegant and disconnected. Governance becomes principled and unrealistic. The grounding dialectic, the productive tension between knowledge creation and reality checking, is what keeps the agent's formal structures honest. When it breaks, the result is ideology, a formally coherent system that has lost contact with the world it claims to describe. Collective capacity is how agents combine to produce capabilities none possess individually. A string quartet produces music no single player can produce alone. Not louder music, but structurally different music, with harmonic and contrapuntal possibilities that do not exist for a solo instrument. But the quartet works only because each player retains autonomy. They listen, adjust, and contribute from their own musical ground, contained by the shared piece, but not commanded by a conductor. The moment one player dominates and the others merely follow, the quartet loses the emergent capacity that made it more than 4 soloists playing simultaneously. Communicative power is the capacity to transmit quality across distance and time. Every act of communication involves loss. What I feel is richer than what I can say. What I say is richer than what you receive. The structural question is how much fidelity the transmission maintains. The closing circle of agency, where one generation's developmental achievements become the quality ground for the next, runs entirely through communicative power. When transmission fidelity is high, apprenticeship, living exemplars, embodied practice, tradition remains alive. When it degrades, each retelling losing quality, each codification losing felt nuance, living tradition decays into dead letter. Every great tradition struggles with this, how to transmit not just the rules, but the felt quality that makes the rules alive. Development, changing what you are. The final family of capabilities is the most profound, because it concerns the agent's power to change not just what it does, but what it is, to revise the very architecture that constitutes its agency. There is a critical threshold here. Most of what agents do in response to change is adaptation, revising the content of their existing loops. A company adjusts its strategy. A person learns a new skill. A team adopts a new tool. The loops are the same. What runs through them is different. This is normal, healthy, continuous, and usually sufficient. But sometimes it is not sufficient. Sometimes the variety hitting the system exceeds what any content revision can absorb. The existing loop architecture itself, what loops there are, how they are coupled, what tensions they manage, must change. This is development, and it is structurally different from adaptation. Development is not doing what you do better. It is becoming a different kind of agent. Self-determination depth is the agent's capacity to undertake this structural change. The most important condition, and the one most frequently violated, is what the framework calls the agapic condition. Development must retain felt quality through the transition. When structural change is forced by external pressure without quality ground, it produces new loops that are themselves hollow. The paradox of compelled development. The system becomes more complex but less alive. Think of a startup forced by investors to professionalize before its culture is mature enough to absorb formal structures. The result is a more complex organization that has lost the quality that made it worth investing in. Development happened. It was not agapic. Path authorship is whether the agent chooses its own developmental direction or merely undergoes whatever change circumstances impose. The structural difference is between development triggered by crisis, reactive, the building is on fire, you must change, and development drawn by attraction, proactive. You can feel the quality of a configuration you have not yet reached, and you move toward it. Both produce structural change. Only the second is authored. The ensemble, why no single capability is enough. The deepest lesson of this framework is that agency is an ensemble achievement, not a single capability accomplishment. No amount of operational brilliance compensates for the absence of a quality ground. No depth of contemplative presence substitutes for the ability to act. No sophistication of governance makes up for decoupled grounding. The effective agent is not the one that maximizes any single capability, but the one whose capabilities are coupled, where perception feeds action, action feeds governance, governance feeds development, and development feeds the perceptual ground of the next cycle. The 24 capabilities are not a checklist to be optimized item by item. They are the components of a living architecture, and what matters most is the quality of their coupling. Whether the whole system breathes, adjusts, and grows as a coherent agent, rather than a collection of independently impressive but structurally disconnected parts. And perhaps the most practically useful insight, the difference between the agent that looks effective and the agent that actually is effective is invisible under normal conditions. It becomes visible only under stress, only when the situation demands something the formal specification did not anticipate. That is when you discover whether the values are real or decorative, whether the governance is grounded or hollow, whether the capabilities are coupled or merely adjacent. The thermostat and the jazz musician both respond to their environment, but when the music changes key unexpectedly, only one of them can follow, because only one of them was listening with a quality ground in the first place.